My father said, "You're dead to me," when I told him about my dream. 10 years later, I built an empire, and now he works in a building I own. It started with soup. Creamy butternut squash, steaming on the table, untouched. My mother had planned the dinner to be civilized, which in our family meant silent judgment served with silver spoons. The table was set like a magazine cover, polished cutlery, wine glasses that never held more than a sip, and conversation that stayed tightly in line, like our family's reputation. I should have known better than to bring a dream to that table. I was 22. Top of my class. Offered a full ride to one of the top law schools in the country. My father, a powerhouse attorney with a nameplate on 3 city buildings, expected me to follow in his footsteps. And honestly, for a while, I pretended I would. I played the part, debates at dinner, LSAT prep books beside my bed, tailored suits for summer internships. But while he was preparing me for courtrooms, I was dreaming in oils and botanicals. I spent nights mixing homemade serums, studying the science of skincare, journaling about ritual and healing. It wasn't just a hobby. It was my purpose, born from summers with my grandmother, who taught me that real power came from taking care of what the world tried to break. That night, I finally said it out loud. "I'm not going to law school," I said, heart pounding. "I'm starting a wellness brand. Natural skincare, healing rituals, something real. It's called Monroe Rituals." Silence. Then, laughter. From my brother, of course, Harvard Law, his smirk always 3 seconds ahead of everyone else's disapproval. My mother looked down at her plate like she couldn't bear to witness the embarrassment. But my father? He didn't laugh. He stared. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached for the printed business plan I had placed beside his fork, the one I spent weeks working on, every page a mix of hope and strategy. He picked it up, held it in the air, and let it fall into his soup bowl. "You're dead to me," he said, his voice calm but final. "Don't come back until you've grown up." That was the moment I lost everything, my home, my financial safety net, my sense of belonging. But in the silence that followed, somewhere beneath the shame and grief, a tiny fire lit inside me. Not rage. Not yet. But something deeper. A quiet vow. If they wouldn't believe in me, I'd build something so undeniable, they'd be forced to see it. That night, I walked out with nothing but a rusted teaspoon from my grandmother's kitchen and the voice in my head whispering, "Healing is power." Rock bottom didn't come with a bang. It came with borrowed blankets, cracked phone screens, and the quiet shame of asking a friend if I could crash, just for a few days. Marisol Vega, my former packaging coworker and the only person who didn't flinch when I told her about Monroe Rituals, offered me her couch with no questions asked. Her apartment was small, warm, and smelled like cinnamon tea, a kindness I clung to when everything else had been stripped away. For 3 months, that couch became my bedroom, office, and therapy chair. By day, I juggled 2 jobs, waitressing at a vegan cafe in Soho, and boxing orders in a freezing fulfillment center downtown. By night, I sat on the floor with scraps of labels, glass jars I'd collected from thrift shops, and the last few oils I could afford. I had no investors. No website. Just a vision and a name, Monroe Rituals. My grandmother's legacy in every syllable. There were nights I almost gave up. Nights I stared at my cracked laptop, watching YouTube videos on emulsifiers and preservative systems until 2 a.m. Nights I cried quietly so Marisol wouldn't hear me. And still, every morning, I woke up and did it again. Because every no from my family still rang in my ears. Every insult, frivolous, childish, unserious, felt like a dare. I started small, $30 DIY skincare kits sold on Etsy with hand-poured labels and handwritten thank you notes. I posted tutorials on TikTok using natural light and my phone taped to a mason jar. The lighting was bad. The edits were rough. But they were real. I didn't sell a lifestyle, I sold a ritual. A reason to come back to yourself. Then it happened. A small Reddit skincare community picked up one of my TikToks. Someone reposted it with the caption, "This girl lives in her car and her cream cleared my eczema in 4 days." It was an exaggeration. I wasn't quite living in my car, but I was dangerously close. 3 days later, I had 800 orders. I cried on the floor of Marisol's kitchen, both hands trembling. I had no staff, no system, and barely any product left. But for the first time since being disowned, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not loud, not glamorous, just a quiet, trembling kind of hope. The kind you build an empire on. Orders poured in faster than I could fulfill them. My tiny production corner, wedged between Marisol's kitchen table and her fridge, turned into a full-scale hustle zone. We worked 12-hour shifts, sealing jars and packing boxes with whatever shipping supplies we could afford. The entire apartment smelled like lavender, rosehip, and raw determination. Marisol became my unofficial co-founder before either of us said the words out loud. She labeled jars while I answered customer messages, juggling the chaos with the quiet rhythm of two women who knew what it meant to be underestimated. We didn't have a fulfillment center. We had an ironing board turned workbench. No marketing team, just me, whispering into my phone camera at 3 a.m., saying things like, "This isn't just a serum. It's a moment for you. A moment to remember you're still here." I wasn't selling products. I was selling survival, healing, reclamation. And somehow, people felt it. Our big break came from the most unexpected place, an influencer I'd never heard of, with a loyal following of chronic skin condition warriors, posted a video. "I've tried every prescription, every cream, every steroid, and then this girl's ritual balm cleared my skin in a week. She says she makes them from a couch. That's badass." The video went viral. We hit 10,000 followers overnight and sold out in 2 hours. I refreshed my phone in disbelief, watching the Shopify dashboard explode. It didn't feel real. I thought maybe the site glitched. But the orders kept coming. I should have celebrated. But that night, I sat in the bathtub with my clothes still on, overwhelmed. Fear crept in, not of failure this time, but of success. I had no backup, no trust fund, no family to call if it collapsed. Just this dream stitched together from grief, grit, and glass jars. But then I remembered the hook that played on loop in my chest like a war drum. My father said, "You're dead to me," when I told him about my dream. 10 years later, I built an empire, and now he works in a building I own. I wasn't there yet. But for the first time, I could see the scaffolding of that future. Brick by brick. Ritual by ritual. I would build it with my bare hands. Success didn't feel glamorous. It felt like sleepless nights, swollen fingers, and bank alerts warning me I had $27 to my name. Every dollar we earned went right back into the business. I skipped meals so I could afford shipping supplies. I reused bubble wrap. I learned how to print custom labels using a broken inkjet printer and sheer force of will. We officially named the company Monroe Rituals. It was Marisol's idea, "Your name deserves to be on something beautiful." She said it like a declaration, like she was rewriting my origin story with that one sentence. Monroe Rituals became more than a business, it became a sanctuary. Every product had a story. The healing clay mask? Inspired by the mud facials my grandmother used to give me as a child. The body oil? A recipe I recreated from a faded notebook she once kept tucked in a biscuit tin. To keep the spirit real, we included handwritten notes in every order. Not mass-printed. Not templated. Real ink, real pain, real hope. Sometimes I wrote, "You are not too much." Other times, "Your softness is not a weakness." Customers began tagging us not just for the skincare, but for how it made them feel. One woman messaged, "I don't know what's in this serum, but I sobbed after using it." In a good way. That message stayed with me. It reminded me why I started this in the first place, to reclaim what the world said wasn't valuable. Tenderness. beauty, vulnerability. But the pressure mounted fast. With each restock, we sold out in less than an hour. Our inbox flooded with requests. When are you launching internationally? Can you do wholesale? Have you thought about Sephora? I wanted to scream. I wasn't some polished CEO with a 10-person team. I was a girl who mixed product in thrifted bowls and cried behind a curtain between batches. There were nights I almost quit. Nights I stared at my reflection and heard my father's voice in my head, frivolous, unstable, wasting your intelligence. And then, like clockwork, I'd see my grandmother's rusted teaspoon on the shelf. The one I'd kept since the day they cleared out her house. I used it in every formula. A reminder of where I came from. Of who taught me that healing wasn't weakness, it was power. That was the chapter one stopped playing small. I wrote the brand manifesto in one sitting, rituals for reclaiming yourself. Not just skincare. A rebellion. A quiet middle finger to every person who called softness a liability. Brick by brick, I was building something unshakable. Not for applause. Not for revenge. But because I finally realized my dream wasn't selfish. It was sacred. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I was folding padded mailers on the floor, exhausted and sticky from working through a summer heatwave without AC. My phone buzzed, and I almost ignored it until I saw the notification at Earth Goddess Vibes mentioned you in a story. She was an indie wellness influencer I'd followed for years, raw, honest, no sponsorship fluff. The kind of person whose audience actually trusted her. I tapped the video. She held up our Calm Revival Balm, camera zoomed in on the label, her voice steady. Okay, I don't know who Ava Monroe is, but this? This fixed the eczema patch I've had for 6 months. And according to her website, she makes these by hand, in her kitchen. She laughed, amazed. She's either a genius or a witch. Maybe both. By the time I finished watching, the Shopify app was already crashing. We hit 800 orders in 3 days, more than we'd made in the previous 3 months combined. My hands shook. I paced the room. Marisol screamed when I called her. We didn't sleep that weekend. We packed orders till sunrise, fueled by gas station coffee and the kind of adrenaline that comes from knowing, this is it. This is the beginning of everything. That moment marked our entry into a different realm. No longer just a side hustle for trauma survivors and gentle souls, Monroe Rituals was being taken seriously. Our follower count exploded. Emails poured in. People didn't just want the products. They wanted the story. They wanted to know who this girl was, the one who mixed oils while sleeping on a couch, the one who wrote love notes to strangers and called it branding. And yet, even as the spotlight widened, I stayed in the shadows. I didn't do interviews. I turned down a podcast feature. I wasn't ready to explain why I'd really started this company. I wasn't ready to talk about the dinner where my father disowned me. Or how I still checked my inbox hoping my mother would write back. Instead, I channeled it into the brand. Into every detail. The glass jars. The eco-packaging. The handwritten notes. Every drop of oil, every scent profile, it was all meticulous. Deliberate. I was building not just a product line, but a sanctuary for anyone who had ever been told their dreams were too much. That month, I wrote our first about page myself. No marketing team. No fluff. Just this line, born from rejection. Built on ritual. Made for anyone who's ever had to start over. That was the breakthrough. Not just the sales. Not the follower count. But the moment I realized, people weren't just buying skincare. They were buying proof. Proof that you can lose everything and still begin again. Proof that softness can survive the fire. It took nearly a year, but we finally moved out of the cramped apartment that doubled as our fulfillment center. Our new space was still modest, a small live-work loft on the edge of the arts district, but to me, it felt like a palace. It had natural light, white brick walls, and floors that didn't creak with every step. For the first time, Monroe Rituals had a place that looked like the future we were building. Marisol and I painted the walls ourselves. We put our tiny assembly line near the windows and filled the shelves with glass jars, herbs, and brown dropper bottles like they were sacred artifacts. We even kept the rusted teaspoon my grandmother once used to scoop dried calendula flowers. It sat in a shadow box by the front door. A reminder of where this all began. With more space came more structure. We finally hired 2 part-time assistants, young, passionate women who reminded me so much of myself at 22. I trained them the way no one ever trained me, patiently, with compassion. No shouting. No shaming. Just care. That was a quiet revolution in itself. Orders kept growing. We launched new products: Glow Memory Oil, Sleep Ceremony Mist, Reclaim Clay Mask. Each one rooted in a memory, a moment of survival. Each one paired with a story from a customer who had written to say, "This helped me feel like a person again." And every time I read those messages, I thought, maybe this is why I was never meant to become a lawyer. Maybe I was always meant to do this kind of healing. But even with our success, I didn't let myself breathe too deeply. I still woke up in cold sweats some nights, dreaming of that family dinner. Of my father's voice saying, "You're dead to me." I still hadn't deleted the voicemail from my mom, cold, clipped, and a month too late, your father saw the article. He's proud, in his own way. I didn't reply. Not because I wasn't tempted. But because I'd learned something important: silence can be a boundary too. And I was building a life where I didn't need their approval anymore. The loft was more than just a space, it was a turning point. A quiet declaration. We weren't just surviving. We were becoming. Slowly, day by day, bottle by bottle, we were creating a home for ourselves, and for every soul who had been made to feel like a failure for dreaming differently. It happened on a Tuesday, one of those perfectly ordinary days that turns into a defining one. I was elbows deep in calendula oil batches when Marisol rushed into the loft holding her phone like it was a ticking bomb. An indie actress, Nia Ellis, known for her raw performances and no-filter skincare struggles, had just posted a video titled "The Only Product That's Ever Worked for My Skin, and It's Not Sponsored." She was holding our healing barrier balm in her hand. Our logo, clear as day. Our story, in her words. Within hours, everything changed. Our website crashed from the traffic. We hit 10,000 orders by midnight. Our Instagram doubled. The email inbox became a flood of retailers, wellness blogs, press inquiries, and one line that made me stop breathing: "Would love to feature you on a wellness founders panel in New York." I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, but because I was ready. I had fantasized about this moment while riding the subway to my waitressing job, about the day someone with influence would see what I was building and tell the world, "She matters." But now that it was real, it didn't feel like a fantasy fulfilled. It felt like proof that the years of quiet struggle weren't invisible. Marisol cried when we got our first international order. I just sat on the floor, back against the shelves, and smiled with my eyes closed. Not because we'd made it, but because something in me had finally started to unclench. And then came the offer from a major VC firm. Clean money. Great terms. All the glitter and scale a founder could want. But I said no. I looked across the room at Marisol, at the girls still bottling with music playing and laughter bouncing off the walls, and I realized I wasn't building this to impress anyone. I was building it to protect something sacred. We chose to bootstrap for 5 more years. Slowly. Intentionally. We redesigned the packaging, launched a ritual journal, and started including handwritten notes from survivors with every product. This was the chapter when the world started to listen. But more importantly, it was the chapter where I finally stopped screaming to be seen. Because now, I wasn't chasing validation. I was offering refuge. Fame doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes, it arrives in whispers, like when a cousin you haven't heard from in years sends a blurry screenshot of your Forbes 30 under 30 feature to the family group chat. No words. Just the image. Like they couldn't believe it either. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over it, heart both racing and numb. A few hours later, I got an email from my mother. Cold. Vague. Your father saw the article. He's proud in his own way. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years of silence. No mention of the night he dropped my business plan into soup and called me a disgrace. Just that single, sterile line. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to prove. By then, Monroe Rituals had become more than a brand, it was a movement. Our community had grown into something sacred. We weren't selling products. We were sending people pieces of themselves. Rituals for healing, for reclaiming, for remembering. But despite the success, something inside me still twisted late at night. I started refreshing comments again. Watching reaction videos to our press features. Reading DMs until 3 a.m., searching for something that felt like love. I'd thought success would cure the ache, that if the world saw me, maybe my family would too. But here I was, with articles and revenue and respect, still wondering if my mother ever listened to the voice memo I sent the night I was disowned. I never deleted it from my phone. I never received a response. At work, I was fierce, strategic, clear, unshakable. But in private moments, I'd catch myself wondering, if I stopped achieving, would I still be worth anything? That question haunted me. Because I hadn't just built a company. I had built a defense mechanism. A monument to my pain, polished until it looked like power. This was the chapter where I learned that success is not the same as healing. That applause can't replace belonging. And that sometimes, even after you win, the silence from the people who were supposed to love you most can be the loudest thing in the room. When Ava stepped onto the stage at the Women in Wellness Summit, the room went still. Not because she was famous, she wasn't a household name. But there was something in her presence. A quiet fire. A gravity that came from surviving what most people never speak about. Dressed in soft linen and no makeup, she looked like her brand, raw, real, radiant. Her voice didn't shake. She spoke with the same calm conviction she used when she first blended oils at her friend's kitchen table. Healing, she said, is not a luxury. It's our birthright. The standing ovation came slowly, then all at once. But she wasn't doing it for the applause. She walked off stage with her head high, her rusted teaspoon in her pocket, the one she'd used since her grandmother's kitchen, still marked with time. A few press outlets tried to push for interviews. She declined them all. Her story didn't belong to headlines. It belonged to the women who messaged her at 2 a.m., saying they'd left abusive homes, started therapy, finally looked in the mirror and saw someone worth loving. Later that evening, after the summit ended, she stood alone on the rooftop of a parking garage. No cameras. No speeches. Just Ava and the city lights. She unwrapped a granola bar, the same kind she used to live on when she had nothing, and leaned against the railing. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of texts, emails, notifications, but she didn't open them. She didn't need validation tonight. Not from investors. Not from her mother. Not even from herself. Because something had shifted. She no longer felt like the girl begging to be seen at the dinner table. She had become the woman who built a seat of her own, and then invited others to sit and heal with her. What they didn't see coming wasn't just her success. It was the way she refused to become bitter. The way she turned abandonment into abundance. She looked at the skyline, the same skyline that once felt unreachable, and whispered, not as a declaration but a promise to herself, I made it. And I never needed them to say it. Ava was back at the studio, blending a new formula, this one infused with rosehip, chamomile, and a drop of neroli, meant to soothe scars, both seen and unseen. The studio had changed since the early days. It was no longer a rented corner in a friend's kitchen. Now it was a sunlit space with polished concrete floors, calming playlists, and a quiet energy that felt like safety. Marisol was across the room, finalizing packaging for their winter ritual boxes. They rarely spoke during these moments, not because there was nothing to say, but because they had built something sacred, a silence filled with trust. The inbox pinged. Ava almost ignored it. But something made her look. The subject line was blank. The sender? Her mother. She opened it slowly, breath catching in her throat, as if some part of her still wanted softness. The message was short. Cold. As if written by a stranger passing along secondhand news. Your father saw the Forbes feature. He's proud in his own way. Mom. That was it. No, I'm sorry. No, how are you? No acknowledgement of the years she'd spent clawing her way out of the silence they sentenced her to. Just a vague olive branch wrapped in thorns. For a split second, the old reflex kicked in, the ache to reply, to be gracious, to reach for her mother the way a child does, even after the hand has been slapped away 100 times. But Ava didn't reply. Not out of anger. Not even pain. But because she had nothing left to prove. Her worth no longer hinged on being welcomed back into a family who only loved her under conditions. She had rewritten the meaning of home, of belonging, of success. Her story didn't need their applause, it had always needed her permission. She archived the email. No dramatic deleting. No forwarding to Marisol. Just release. And then she went back to her formula, stirring the tincture with her grandmother's spoon, the same one her father once called silly sentimental junk. She smiled faintly. Because the scent rising from the bowl wasn't just fragrant. It was full circle. And finally, it was hers. The studio was quiet the morning the interview request came in. A journalist from a major publication wanted to feature Ava in a cover story titled The Healers, Women Redefining Power Through Wellness. They asked for a sit-down, a full shoot, and, most terrifying of all, her personal story. The rise of Monroe rituals had become legend in niche circles, but this would be global. Exposing. The kind of feature that turns whispers into headlines. Ava stared at the email for nearly an hour, the cursor blinking like it was daring her to say yes. She thought about the early days, packing orders on the floor of Marisol's one-bedroom, crying into spreadsheets, filming tutorials with cracked phone screens. She thought about the night she slept in her car outside a 24-hour diner, whispering affirmations to herself like a prayer. And she thought about the voicemail she once left her mother, still unanswered, where her voice cracked as she said, "I'm still your daughter. I'm trying my best." This story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the hundreds of thousands of women who had written to her, saying her products made them feel seen, whole, worthy. It belonged to the girl who mixed lavender oil and honey in her grandmother's kitchen. To the woman who dared to say no to a legacy that never loved her back. But still, Ava declined the interview. She didn't need the cover. Her brand spoke through its rituals, not red carpets. Instead, she wrote a quiet blog post titled "Why I Won't Tell My Story Yet," and shared it on the Monroe Rituals website. In it, she wrote about healing privately. About choosing silence not out of fear, but out of sovereignty. She wrote, "Not every success story needs to be shouted to matter. Some are written in scent, in stillness, in survival." The post went viral. Thousands commented, sharing their own stories of reclaiming worth. Wellness influencers reposted it. Editors quoted it. But Ava didn't check the numbers. She was too busy blending a new balm, one inspired by grief, by growth, by grace. She named it First Light. In a world that taught her to chase applause, Ava had chosen presence. And in doing so, she found the kind of power that doesn't need a spotlight, because it glows from within. The summit stage lights dimmed as Ava stepped down, her keynote echoing in the minds of hundreds. Applause still hummed in the background, but her chest felt quiet. Not empty, just still. She didn't linger for photos or press. She slipped out the side door, trading the glass towers of downtown for the soft dusk of a rooftop parking lot. Heels off, blazer folded beside her, Ava sat cross-legged near the edge, a granola bar in hand, staring out at the skyline. Her bag rested beside her, and tucked inside, as always, was the rusted silver teaspoon from her grandmother's house. Her grounding object. The one that had stirred every early formula and reminded her of who she was long before the world cared. She took a slow breath. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about growth metrics, inventory demands, or whether her father had seen the latest headline. That man, who once told her, "You're dead to me," had become a ghost in her story, no longer the villain, just irrelevant. The voice that used to echo in her head now sounded like static. Ava had built something no one could take from her, not because of revenge, but because she chose to begin again, on her own terms. Behind the brand, beyond the empire, Ava remained a woman who wrote letters by hand. Tucked inside random Monroe Rituals boxes were anonymous notes sealed with gold wax. You are not the names they gave you. You are the woman you're becoming. She never signed them. She didn't need to. Her presence was in every balm, every oil, every ritual. Her grandmother once said, "Healing is power." Ava had turned that wisdom into legacy. She didn't return home. She didn't rebuild bridges that were never meant to hold her weight. But she built a path forward, lined with wild herbs, soft light, and the scent of freedom. Ava Monroe didn't need to scream her success. She whispered it, and the world listened. If you've ever been rejected for choosing a dream that didn't fit their expectations, remember, sometimes the most powerful empires rise from the ruins they left you in. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. What ritual is helping you reclaim yourself?